Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly settle down, and some more people are enjoying the refreshment. They'll be joining us any moment. Once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly settle down. Some of the people are enjoying the refreshment. They'll be joining us any moment. In the meanwhile, I'll just tell you what's happening in this month. Not many programs in the month of March as well as in the month of April. March, on 28th of March, we are the strategic partner for this event, which is the Hindu Women 2025, World of Women 2025, recognizing the excellence. It's happening as ITC Grand. The registration is already closed, it's full house actually, and thanks for the overwhelming response. Then on 17th of April, we have Read and Grow on emotional intelligence, why it makes sense matter more than IQ. So again, we have a lovely panel. Then again, very high-profile event on 26th of April is we also celebrate with a memorial lecture. India as a global player, the challenges in the multipolar world. We got an outstanding speaker, Chandrasekar, who is also a professor from IIT Madras. He's going to be talking to us. Besides, we have also lined up a number of other events, and we'll keep connecting with you. So thank you. Keep watching them. Keep sending your feedback. It'll be nice. Coming to today's event, the good boy syndrome, a peculiar feature of being a man in the Indian context. Actually, a very interesting subject. I know you must be thinking what it's all about, and I think be a man or woman, you listen to this topic, it will do a lot of good in handling yourself, handling your thing. If you're a man, you will be able to discover yourself, you will be able to do a self-actualization. Many things can happen, and I think that way this is a very, very interesting topic. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together to welcome distinguished panel for this evening. Kartik, popularly known as Kaka, Mr. Kartik V Kartikeyan. Mr. Ganesh Chella, doesn't need an introduction, very known thing. Sharada, Chandrasekar, and Mr. Lakshminarayanan, Duraiswamy. May could you please take your place on the dais, sir. The format of the program for this evening is I will request Lakshmi to deliver our Senior Vice President of MMA, deliver the formal welcome introduction. Thereafter, we'll have a formal launch of the book, and then I'll hand it over to Ganesh Chella. He will take it forward. Before I call upon Mr. Lakshminarayanan, let me have the privilege of introducing all the distinguished speakers for this evening. May I have the AV, please.
Is a seasoned executive coach and leadership consultant with 35 plus years of experience in corporate leadership, organizational development, and HR. Mr. Kartik empowers senior leaders through strategic coaching, cultural transformation, and his proprietary frameworks like the Transformative Alignment Map Registered Trademark Symbol and Coral Registered Trademark Symbol. A sought-after facilitator and author, Mr. Kartik blends deep insight with practical wisdom to inspire lasting leadership impact. Mr. Ganesh is a pioneer of executive coaching in India with over 4 decades of impactful work in HR, organization development, and leadership coaching. As co-founder of CFI, Mr. Ganesh has shaped it into a premier institution for coach education and leadership development. A respected thought leader and prolific author, Mr. Ganesh blends deep practice with insight to drive transformative change. Ms. Sharada Chandrasekar is a seasoned leadership and executive coach with over 40 years of diverse experience in corporate leadership, consulting, and coaching. Known for her empathetic and transformative approach, Ms. Sharada helps leaders break through self-limiting beliefs and embrace their full potential. Her work spans sectors and includes a strong focus on coaching women in STEM and leadership transitions. Mr. Lakshminarayanan, Senior Vice President of Madras Management Association, is the Managing Director of Sundaram Home Finance Limited. With over 30 years of experience in financial services, a qualified cost accountant and MBA from Liba, Chennai, Mr. Lakshminarayanan has expertise in risk management, operations, and strategy, with leadership roles at Sundaram AMC, GE Capital, and Citibank.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's a panel for this evening. Very, very high profile. We are going to have a wonderful time. And all the viewers watching it online, if you have any questions, what is the numbers on the screen, you can send it to them. People out here, there will be a QR code on the flash on the screen. You can just scan it and send your question. We've got a Mentimeter, so we'll be able to respond to all your questions. I will now request Mr. Lakshminarayanan to please deliver the formal welcome address. Mr. Lakshmi.
Thank you, Group Captain. Good evening to all of you. It's indeed my privilege to deliver this welcome address at this very special discussion on the theme, the good boy syndrome, a peculiar feature of being a man in the Indian context, being organized by MMA with the support of KAS. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Kartik V Kartikeyan, Executive Coach, Leadership Consultant and Author, Mr. Ganesh Chella, Co-Founder CFI, and Ms. Sharada Chandrasekar, Leadership and Executive Coach, CFI. I take this opportunity to welcome all the members of MMA, our guests from other organizations, and all the participants who have joined online. For the benefit of our guests and invitees from various organizations, I would like to give you a bit of a background that MMA was established in 1956, has evolved today as the largest management association in the country, with over 8,000 members spread across 10 chapters in Tamil Nadu and Pondicherry. MMA has been awarded the best management association in the country for 14 years in a row, including 2022-23. Looking at the title of this book, I also have several questions. What is a good boy syndrome? Why should boys be good? Is being a good boy a very vital trait only for leading a good family life, or is it something that we can apply to the corporate life as well? What are some of the characteristics that make a man a good boy? Are these characteristics same at home and at work as well? Do they hold good in all situations, or is it very circumstantial? I'm hoping that we'll get some answers later this evening today. I had a sneak peek of this book a couple of weeks back when Mr. Kartik was here and he briefly spoke about this. He dissects the ways in which the Indian boys are raised to internalize a rigid framework of familial and social expectations. The book not only offers a lens into the struggles of men navigating these expectations, but also provides strategies for self-awareness, self-actualization, liberation from this invisible cage. We are indeed fortunate to have amongst us this evening Mr. Kartik, author of this very unique book, in conversation with Ganesh and Ms. Sharada, who are accomplished coaches. I'm sure that their combined experience in both the corporate world and the leadership coaching will bring great value to this discussion today. I once again thank my colleagues from the management committee, of members of MMA, distinguished invitees of MMA and partner organizations who have joined us today here in person as well as those watching online. Wishing you all a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lakshminarayanan. Now is the most awaited moment for the evening. Let's have a formal soft launch of the book so that it's a photo op. And may I request you please step forward, do the honor of launching the book. And can I have the books, please? Come. Thank you. Now I request Mrs. Ganesh Chella to Mr. Ganesh Chella to take it forward. Mr. Ganesh.
Good evening, friends. Most books you can actually understand by the title of the book. It's a rather straightforward book, right? Basics of marketing is about marketing. Now, good boy is a very intriguing term. But I must say that as a coach, as a student of human behavior, and as an observer of social changes, I genuinely believe, Kartik, this is a very, very important. And I have been personally quite excited about talking to many people and encouraging you to share this idea because it's very important to understand the place of the Indian male in society, at home and at work, especially because the Indian female is evolving so rapidly and changing in such an astronomical pace that a lot of the question and answers can come from understanding the Indian male. So maybe it would be useful to ask you a couple of things. Firstly, about the book, Kartik. And then what I'd like Sharada to do is, because especially she works with a lot of women in roles of leadership, I'm sure she'll have some questions from that point of view. Lax, I'm sure you have questions on what it means, including the questions you asked. I'd like you to join. And I have some questions for whether the good boy is actually a good thing or not a good thing for organizations. Right? I think a lot of these are there. But first, maybe you can spend a little bit to describe the good boy in a way that someone can ask themselves, am I a good boy or not? Is a good boy a good thing or a bad thing? I think some very basics would be in place.
Sure. Thanks, Ganesh. Good evening to everybody, and thanks for being here today. I'm going to take a little detour before answering the question. I'm just going to ask you, when you hear this word good boy or good boy syndrome, spontaneously can you just say any image that comes to your mind? That image can be a person, a character, it can be a word. LKG. What else? Sorry? Conformist. There you go. Gandhi. Nerd. Samathu Payan. Nalla Payan, Samathu Payan. Mama's boy. We hear only the male voices in this room, which also must be saying something. Rahul Dravid, yes. Lord Rama. Interesting. So you see, you look at these patterns, that itself says something to us. Roger Federer, yes, absolutely, thank you. Sorry? Calvin and Dennis. Yes, sir. Thank you. So, you see, this good boy, I still haven't heard any woman's voice yet. Just registering for the record. And maybe it's putting immense pressure on the women to say, okay, no, am I supposed to say something? Etc. Yeah? Maybe the good girl syndrome. Yeah. Maybe. A lot of people have asked me why I haven't written about that. Sorry, next book. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Well, so this itself gives us a sense of who this good boy is. What is this good boy all about? Because it's not that you see him in some planet Jupiter or in some other orbit somewhere else. The good boy is right here, within us, in each of us. It's not gendered. Whether it's a man or a woman, there is an element of goodness in each of us. Of course, there are societally and biologically, there are differences to what a good girl is and what a good boy is. We'll probably come to that later. But thank you for sharing the metaphors. They are actually very, very informative. Essentially, why I thought I should write this was somewhere I think partly it started off with being a bit of an autobiographical look. I mean, at some point in time, I was sitting down and looking at my own life and saying, what has been my life all about, right? What have I done with my life? And I'm sure many of you must be asking this question yourselves, right? Sometimes you sit in the evening and then say, what have I been doing in my life? What's my life all about? How have I shaped it? Not necessarily negatively, right? Some of us ask this question with a sense of maybe looking forward. Some of us look backward, maybe with regret, maybe with pride. So I was going through that process myself and I said, okay, I looked at it, then some patterns became very evident. So many of these words that you have used could have applied to me also. So it started there. And then as I also like Sharada, Ganesh and several others here, I'm also a coach and I'm also my profession, I'm a consultant and I coach, I facilitate, I work with human beings and human systems in various places. And I was increasingly seeing this all around myself. So wherever I went, I saw, okay, so this person is a shade of a good boy, or this person is not a good boy, but there are some aspects of him that I can understand. So this whole thing was that it was not something just applicable to me. I was seeing it all around. Maybe there is something very pervasive about this, the good boy, that is not hidden in some corner or is not just lodged in one microcosmic entity called me. He seems to be all around. So that was a very important thing, puzzling over this thing. What is this about? Then as I started looking at it more and more introspectively and looking at myself and looking at other people through this emerging lens of this good boy, I think many features started becoming very apparent to me. So very apparent and perhaps answering one of Lakshminarayan's questions. The good boy really is, who is the good boy is a very interesting question. Now if you look at a very interesting observation by Lakshminarayan, this is my own book. So he said, Kartikeyan, you're the first person I've seen for his own book, he has written so many post-it notes. He said, I mean, you should be much more confident of what you have yourself written. But I said, look, that put me in touch, saying, this is the good boy. You know, this is the good boy in some sense. And then I said, after that, looked at when it was a good provocative input from my side. I felt like tearing off all those post-its. Okay, let whatever come. But so the good boy essentially is one who, and you can answer this good in different ways, but the way I have tried to approach it is to say he is that person who upholds the order. Whatever that order is, the order is maybe the family expects something and says you have to be this, or maybe society expects from you. Maybe your organizational role expects something from you. Maybe your children expect something from you. No matter what the larger configuration or context that is laying down some expectations, the good boy is one who abides by it. And he not only abides by it, but he also upholds it. So this is what it is, and he will proliferate it, he'll propagate it, he will do his bit to keep that order alive. So that is essentially the good boy. And having started there, then once you start unraveling some of these threads, more and more start coming. And the interest started going into saying, so what is the good boy's joy all about? What is his sorrow about? And what does he worry about? In his lonely moments, what does he think? What does he feel? What does he say? How does he act? And also looked at, very importantly, patriarchy in the Indian context. India is a patriarchal society. We all know that and we experience it. And so the patriarchal, I have in fact made an assertion in my book that the good boy is part of the patriarchy project of the nation. If the patriarchy needs a good boy. If the good boy is not there, who knows, patriarchy might get dismantled or deconstructed. So it's in the interest of patriarchy that good boy is continued. And it shows up in organizational spheres. So corporates are no exception to it. You have the good boy everywhere. Now this will all throw up the question, is the good boy good or not good, etc. Right? And that's a question Ganesh is asking, Lakshminarayanan also asked. Now, I'm not going to answer that immediately, but we will try and explore that during the day's conversation. So that's what I want to start with.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. Dax, do you have a question from the list you had?
Yeah, the first question is just holding back and answering, is the good boy a good or a not so good thing? But the other question that came to my mind when we first met a couple of weeks back was also that, is this a book about defining a good boy in a family surrounding, or is this something that you can take away something from this to a corporate life as well? I would like to know what you think.
Does it transcend roles?
Yeah, absolutely. That's,
Just to a lot of definitions about a good boy, that we all spoke about here is more from a familial surroundings, what defines a good boy, and we all had different versions of that. But in a corporate setup, if you say who's a good boy, I'm assuming there will be a fairly homogeneous response to this. Does performance define how good you are, or does loyalty defines how good you are? And maybe there are a few adjectives that will go in tandem with that. So I would like to understand your thought process on that.
sure. Great question. So the good boy is not the captive property of any particular system. So for example, if you look at the family system, you will find a whole lot of good boys in the family system. You look at corporates, you will find a whole lot of them. So what I've in fact done in the book, you will see, is that there is a whole chapter called the corporate good boy. And those of you who are picking up the book, and I hope every one of you will, please read that chapter, because you're part of your management people, you're part of Madras Management Association. There's something about the corporates and the way the good boy shows up in the corporates is very interesting. And essentially, if I go back to the definition of the good boy, he upholds the order. Now, what does that mean? It's very interesting that it is not about moral compass of what is considered good or bad in society's eyes that the good boy necessarily subscribes to. Whichever context he is in, whatever is the order that is held as significant by that system, he will play according to those rules. Most striking example is in India, we have heard, not just in India, it happens in several other countries as well. You've heard of honor killing? Killed for honor. No? Very shocking, deplorable, shameful blot in the reality of society. And very often, it's carried out by the brother of, so let's say the girl has gone and gotten married to somebody who's outside her caste. Who's commissioned to go and kill that couple? The brother of the girl. Very often. You'll find some deviations here and there, but 90% of the cases. And that person, in the eyes of the family, do you think that person is a good boy or is a bad boy? In the eyes of the family, he's undeniably a good boy. He has acted according to the honor of the family. So he's upheld the honor of the family. In the eyes of society and law, he may be, a criminal. He's done something illegal and shameful. But in the eyes of the family, he's upheld the honor. So whatever is that honor, whatever is the code, whatever are the rules that are applicable to the system that he belongs to, he upholds it, he values it, he propagates it, he will take it forward, he'll live by it, swear by it. Applies to corporates also. So even in the corporate, if the fundamental reality is that of driving execution and delivery, as happens very often in many global capability centers, the good boy is very much there. You use the word nerd, right? And the nerd is, again, very often you find in corporate settings, especially in IT, hardware, software organizations, the nerd is a very important person there. Yeah? And he is upholding the order of what he has learned and what the organization is trying to create, he will, of course, the nerd also has a nerdy, quirky character, but as long as he's playing according to the rules of what he's expected to do, bingo, you have a very nice, good boy playing out there. Yeah. And so you find that, and if the organization is doing things that are, let's say in marketing, so if he does all that, he brings all his talents to do whatever is required by the organization, you find the good boy in all the space. So I've actually interviewed 5 very interesting people. I interviewed 3 people who are from outside organizations but working with organizations. One academician, a professor from IIM Bangalore. I've interviewed an organization development consultant and an executive coach. So you get an outside-in view of this corporate good boy. And then I've interviewed a CHRO of an organization of Bajaj Auto, and I've interviewed another person who's the CEO of an organization, of one of the Wipro's units. And just to get a contrast, and if you see, look very closely, there isn't a great contrast. So all of them are saying that the good boy is one who values the norms of the organization, lives by the norms of the organization. But they're also saying certain other things about some of the limitations of the good boy, which is an important aspect to keep in mind. We have to read about it, and so it can't be, the question then comes up, is a good boy relevant in the world or not? And the answer is yes, but we have to do some work. We have some work to do that is very important for us. I will talk about that a little later.
I think an important thing to do now is to shift gears, right? The world, in the eyes of the world, the changes that women have made over a generation have been radical, right? And in the eyes of men, they have been changes which are hard to comprehend, difficult to cope up with, and fall outside the realms of what good boys will consider acceptable. And to engage with you on this and interrogate this topic, I invite Sharada to come in.
Thank you, Ganesh. And I think I should first congratulate Kartikeyan for formalizing an idea, the good boy syndrome, which he has brought it up and surfaced it, which we are today discussing and exploring this topic, which has been an idea which was long back should have happened. Because in my long experience of having worked with a lot of men in corporate sectors and women of late, young women whom I'm coaching, women who are in a stage when they are building up their profession, their family and their life, I come across quite a few instances where they are grappling with this challenge of a partner or a teammate who is probably showing a great portion of this good boy qualities. I'm not using the word syndrome because I want to probably explore that with you a little bit. A lot of those qualities, it made a whole lot of sense when I went through the book. And it sort of struck, it's like the dots got connected for me. And I think this book is really showing up an opportunity for many people to really, if they read, go through to understand, because one of the first steps for any transformation is self-awareness. But how do we really become self-aware? I know that something of mine is not working or enabling, even in a personal relationship as a spouse, or as a team player in the corporate sector, or as a leader, because I'm sure he will have a lot to say on how a good boy gets sort of built, a human being starts to become a good boy, and the various influences and all, and it is not a very conscious process. So therefore, the process of really transformation has to be very conscious, out of self-awareness and knowing really, okay, what is not working for me? As you said, a part of this good boy, I think, is really enabling, because he upholds order, the systems. And in a family which is today so disruptive and all that, I think part of good boy syndrome will have a great role in maintaining family relationships, marital relationships. Can I say that? And therefore, that part is very critical. We cannot do away with it. But however, what is it doing to restrict the relationship? I'm bringing it in a very family relationships, in a husband-wife relationship, and a team relationship, what is getting compromised. So I think that way this idea is really great. But what probably the first question I have for you is, when I saw this topic, a peculiar feature of being a man in the Indian cause. So what is that word peculiar? Probably you could. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought a lot and I fought a lot for this word. So, actually, the word peculiar itself is a very peculiar word, right? I'm sure many of you would agree that, it's a very peculiar word. You hear this word and you say, what does that mean? So, first of all, I want to say that I did not intend to use this word as a attention ploy. It's not an attention bait to say, there's some word peculiar. Let me pick up this because he's used a word which is not. So that was not my intent at all. But I know that some people do think that way. They say, okay, is it a attention grabber? It sometimes is. But for me, it was something. The word peculiar itself is very important for us to mull over, right? The word peculiar it challenges us, right? When you hear the word peculiar, doesn't it challenge you? It challenges to think a little deeper about it. So when I actually first approached my publisher and talked about this word, they said, sir, that is not a great word to use. They said, please just say good boy syndrome and leave it at that. Or they suggested a much more generic kind of a subtitle. Something like the quintessential Indian man or something like that. But I was unhappy with that because I said it doesn't quite do justice to the quirkiness, the idiosyncrasies, the nuances. Because a good boy has to be understood not just by looking at him. You have to understand the good boy by interrogating him. When I say interrogating, I'm not talking about a police interrogation, I'm talking about interrogating and as in asking questions with a genuine sense of puzzlement, with a question of wonder. We have to unpack what this good boy is about. We have to inquire into the good boy. We have to explore what this good boy is. Now, to me, the word that became kind of like a portal to do all of this was this word peculiar. And once I got this peculiar word into my head, I couldn't get it out. It's like sometimes, we get this thing that catches us and then we don't want to let go of it. It was exactly that. So like I said, I thought a lot and I fought a lot. And many times I went back to my publisher and said, look, I absolutely insist that it is important because it is something that, now the fact that Sharada is asking this question today, what does it show us? Anybody, what does it tell us? It tells us that it actually worked, right? That the idea that somebody is puzzling over this. Why is this word peculiar there? I exactly wanted that. I want people to go in there and say, let us use this opportunity presented by this book and the research that accompanies the book to understand this good boy a little better. So if I had used a word like good boy syndrome, understand the Indian male, or explore the Indian male, okay, all right, fine, tomorrow, I'll read it day after tomorrow. So, but peculiar makes you perhaps go there and say, and pick it up and read about it so that you can understand it better. So, I don't know if I've answered, but yeah.
Thank you, Kartik. I went through this book and couple of things I went repeatedly because to really understand, he has done a lot of work. And so on page 6, okay, on page 6, you said about GBS from the viewpoint of boundaries. Setting boundaries from an Indian context is unknown to us, I'm sure. Okay, as a parent, I never knew how to help my children set boundaries, nor as a parent, I could help set boundaries. It was like rules, the culture, all those things were the established boundaries. But I think this is a very critical point, which probably Could you please elaborate on this boundary? Now, setting up boundaries can be restrictive or enabling for one to grow into their autonomy. You know, I just want to quote Carl Jung, what he said. The hardest boundaries to set are often the ones that free us most. Okay, so I think this is a very important topic of setting up boundaries because this pervades all relationships irrespective of, the context, whether it is corporate, family, or personal. So maybe something we need to start getting a little more familiar and comfortable with. So I think it's probably a little more from you would help us.
Thank you. I think it's a wonderful question, and I'll start responding to it with Carl Jung's quote that you've talked about the boundaries that are the most difficult to set are the ones that free us the most. It's a very profound statement if you think about it. And it actually takes us to a very important character that you'll encounter in this book. So when I write about the good boy syndrome in this book, it's not just about the good boy. The good boy is standing on a spectrum of multiple identities. Okay, so if you read this, you'll find that on one side, there is somebody whom I have called as a self-centric boy. Now, by the way, there are no bad boys, no? So I know somebody used the word bad boy, but there are no bad boys, right? So there are, what's that? Did somebody say anything? Sorry? He's a bad boy, okay. Maybe he released a movie by that name. So, in the spectrum that I've tried to describe, I have talked, well, the good boy is there, but on one side you have somebody called the self-centric boy, not self-centered boy, self-centric, and there is a reason why I've called that. Then there is somebody called the equivocal boy, who's not self-centric, who's not the good boy either, he's somewhere in between, Trishangu. Yeah? And then you have the good boy. And then you have somebody called the ungood boy. And then you have the pluricentric boy. The ungood boy is the one who is in many ways the counterpoint of the good boy. He's not bad. Now the ungood boy is what you get when you work with Jung's quote, very interesting one, which says the boundaries that are the hardest to set are the ones that free us the most. So the ungood boy works very hard to set his boundaries. Because for him it doesn't come easy. The good boy, for the good boy, he does not have to set boundaries. What does the good boy have to do? He has to adapt to and live within the boundaries that are given by the system that he is part of. The ungood boy is not like that. The ungood boy says, okay, this is what the system is telling me to do. Maybe I should do something slightly different. Maybe I should challenge it. Maybe I should do it slightly differently. The book I have quoted my own example that, when I grew up, I am a Tamil Brahmin boy, grew up mostly in Coimbatore and Madras. Now I still call it Madras. I'm so glad you're called Madras Management Association, right? So I studied in Vivekananda College, did my BCom, and the overall family expectation was that I should, take a guess, that I should do what? There you go. Do CA, or it would have been okay if I had said I'll go, if I had taken the science stream and gone for engineering, or go for medical, or lawyer. All these were acceptable ones. But somehow, none of those really worked. Sometimes I think Providence plays a hand. None of these worked out for me. I took the commerce stream and I didn't feel confident enough to take the CA. I did the entrance exam, but I was diffident. I heard people saying, CA va, 5 varsham padikanu sir, neenga vandu inter pass padradhukku 5 varsham. You'll take 5 years to even clear inter. In those days, maybe people do it very differently these days. So I felt very diffident about that. So somebody, one of my friends, he said, look, why don't you try this thing called MBA? You can apply to this IIM, XLRA, etc. So I wrote exams, left, right, and center. I got admission only in one place called XLRA. So then when I went there, everything changed for me. What rules, regulations, and boundaries that I was living by they were blown away to the wind, by the winds of XLRA. I know Ganesh is also an XLRA. So, it challenged my notions of what it means to live within boundaries. So in some sense, in XLRA was when I started exploring the ungood boy for myself, the first time. So, many little things. You start as a young fellow, what is smoking all about? What is drinking all about? What are girlfriends all about? What does it mean to bunk an exam? So many of those things which I think maybe things are very different these days with millennials and Gen Zs, but those days it was a big thing. So ungood boy was something that I explored with. Now, ungood boy doesn't do only these things that I've aforementioned things. That ungood boy, challenges notions. He sets his own, he operates by his autonomy. But coming back to Sharada's question, and I'm going to read, and a couple of times I'm going to read from the book because I think that I've tried to put it in a certain way. In one of the key defining features of human systems is boundaries. Here we have a boundary. We have a bell which is rung very diligently, which is a boundary experience here. All of us, like good boys and good girls, trooped in, and right at the time we are participating in a session. Yeah, there are rules and regulations, there are boundaries. So then I said, let us attempt to see the good boy syndrome, I call it the TGB syndrome, the good boy syndrome, from the viewpoint of boundaries. Boundaries are physical, psychological, emotional, and social limits or containing parameters. Boundaries help to protect the well-being of people inside. They also tell you what your autonomy is. Within the boundary, what can you do and what can you not do is made very clear through boundaries. So especially for the good boy, he will want to find out what can I do, and more importantly, he will want to know what am I expected to not do. Because why would he be obsessed with that question? Because by chance, if he does something that is not part of what the system has set as a boundary, then he risks becoming, in the eyes of the system, not a good boy. He doesn't become an ungood boy. He may actually be called the bad boy in the system. Yeah? Am I making sense? Yeah? Right. So, now, very important thing along with boundaries don't come from the air, right? Boundaries come from what? How do boundaries get set? By ourselves. And when you look at your family system, who sets boundaries? Parents, children, others that you work with. So mostly boundaries are set by expectations of people who work with you. Yeah, I expect you to do this. In a corporate thing, you said, this is your role, I expect you to do this in your role. You are being hired as a coder, this is what you're expected to do. You're hired as a field salesman, you're expected to do this. You're hired as a supervisor in the shop floor, you're expected to do. So expectations tell us what those boundaries are. And for the good boy, and you'll find this in page 7, 8, number of wonderful expectations are there. Beautiful. Each one of them is like a commandment. Right? And I'm sure when I read it out, most of you will tell yourself that you're aware of it. Take responsibility, be the provider. One good boy expectation. Contain your emotions. Don't show all your emotions. So good boys are expected to not reveal all their emotions. They are even expected to maintain a stoic face, not reveal the emotions. Respect your elders. Another expectation. Don't ask too many questions. And if at all, ask questions for which we have answers. Don't ask questions for which we don't have answers. One of my elders in my family had a word called Adhiga Prasangi. Have you heard this word? Adhiga Prasangi kya kar hai? Adhiga Prasangi means you are asking beyond what you are expected to ask. So even your questions are coded. You can ask question of type A, type B, type C, type D, E, F, G questions. Don't ask. And you become an Adhiga Prasangi. So don't ask those questions. That will rock the boat. Sometimes also be better than others in the family. You have to, he got first rank. If there's a rank above first rank, you should get it. So push like that. And preserve the family name. I've captured about 6. I'm sure there may be many more. But boundaries are set by expectations of others and our own expectations of ourselves. And very often, figuring out what these boundaries are and how do I operate within that is what the good boy diligently does. The ungood boy steps out. He says, all right, why should I abide by these boundaries? Why can't I set my boundaries? Yeah. So if you see a cricketer who is coming in and stepping out of the crease, literally, and smacking the ball for a 4, he is actually challenging certain notions of, he's saying, let me play my free stroke. So he's exercising his autonomy. And that is where the question of where the, so boundaries are, how boundaries are held makes a huge difference to whether the person is being a good boy or is being an ungood boy. Yes, sir.
Which makes me actually, this thing about the autonomy, okay, brings the very critical element of autonomy when you just, I think, ended your conversation with is how do really boundaries set a good boy free to experience his autonomy in any context? Because that's where lies the transformation, right? And I'm sure you have touched upon this in your book many places, how that is the exploration and the, the other chapter that you wrote, probably.
The adult development.
Yeah.
I think that's again a very provocative, thought-provoking.
Enrichment.
Yeah, enrichment, yeah.
Yeah. And also his shadow work, that you spoke about, because finally the shadow part of a good boy remains unexplored for an individual, and he continues to be a good boy and therefore not really to his fullest, living his life to the full. And that's where comes the biggest challenges, whether it's in a corporate world, a leader who turns out who is not able to exercise his autonomy, leadership, in a relationship, he remains as a compliant person, not really becoming the exploring the possibilities, not risk averse. So I think maybe some behavior which are indicative of a good boy, which can be limiting, could help. And therefore, how could he really explore the autonomy that is his by, breaking out of that shell of a good boy?
So, it's very important to note that the good boy also has a certain modicum of autonomy. Now, he has what I would call as conditional autonomy. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? Conditional and autonomy are kind of opposing words. But the good boy has a certain conditioned or conditional autonomy. He has autonomy to operate within a certain radius. Now, the radius may be a very short, constrictive, restrictive radius, or it can be a wider one. That depends on the context of the family that he is part of or the organization that he is part of. It does not matter. So there are different diameters and radii of boundaries that are available within which the good boy can exercise his autonomy. So what you can, now one of the things, for example, and I've written about this in today's times, if you look at the generation, the young people today, societal norms have and are indeed changing quite a bit. So for example, what was not common 30 years ago, like dating, right, or live-in relationships, premarital sex. So if I just take these three as an example, they were not common in say 30, 40 years ago. Yet they are increasingly becoming part of the social fabric today. Now, a person who operates saying, I can practice any of these, is still being a good boy because he is operating according to the autonomy that his context is giving him today. Right? So so good boy is not a moral thing. You should not do that. It's sin. So we're not talking about that kind of goodness. We are talking about goodness as defined by the expectations of the context in which the person is living. So the good boy has a certain amount of autonomy which is conditioned and narrated to him. He's socialized into the context that he lives in. The ungood boy, on the other hand, and there's a very interesting chapter 6 which talks about adult development and the good boy syndrome. It says there are different levels of development of the mind that are possible as we live our lives. The ungood boy operates with a different type of autonomy. His autonomy is not conditioned or conditional autonomy. It is his own self-authored autonomy. He says, I want to do this. And I want to step out of the boundaries and I will do certain things that others have not. It may not be expected of me, but I will still do it. And may not also do exactly. That's right. That's true. So it does not mean that he has to necessarily do something. He may say, I will not participate in this act, and that is quite, I will exercise my autonomy to not do that. Absolutely. That's very much a part of.
So,
Yeah.
one of the questions I want to ask is, organizations continue to struggle with women's participation in the workforce, right? We find that beyond a certain level, the number of women who grow up to middle management or senior management positions is limited. While a lot of factors are around what women want to do, how much of it is contributed by the good boy syndrome?
That's something that I haven't thought about. It's a very interesting question. I'm going to go out on a limb and take a wager on this.
Sure.
And I think it's a fairly significant contributor to that phenomenon could come from the good boy syndrome. And I'll tell you my reasoning for that is that for organizations and for people in traditionally organization given power. So if I'm, let's say, the head of the organization and or the executive head, for me, it's easier to have my writ continue to run if I'm bringing in the good boy and I'm promoting the good boy into higher and senior roles and locating that person, even though the person may not be entirely competent to do, so that role which the person is playing may not flourish by his good boyness, but he still gets promoted into those roles simply because from a leadership perspective, it serves the needs of the leader to do this. Now, this may be a bit of a cynical view, so I'm happy to be proven wrong. It is possible that this is not really practiced. But having said that, if I think through it, it's possible, I think that the good boy continues to enjoy the Chhatra Chaya, the patronage of the seniors, because that allows them to continue their agenda. Now, if I'm looking at women participation in the workforce, I think it raises a lot of inconveniences for traditional male leaders. Right? And many of the male leaders may themselves be good boys, or they may be self-centric boys. Let's also remember that India is continuing to be a patriarchal society. Now, this goes back to the patriarchy thing that we talked about. Patriarchy is very much prevalent in organizational spaces as well. So it's not that patriarchy is some, I see it in villages, I see it there in some distant place, but sorry, in organizations are as much patriarchal. So in a patriarchal setup, it is more likely that you will have either the good boy or the self-centric boy rise to the top, ungood boy also increasingly. But women coming in, ungood boys will happen in the future, but I think there is both ungood boy and increasing women participation raises certain inconveniences for traditional male bastions of power. That's my thought around.
Also, I'm wondering, the paradigm of the good boy could be that men should be the providers and women should be the caregivers. Is part of the good boy paradigm, and women coming into the workforce upsets that order.
Yes.
Correct? That's also another possibility. And therefore, will the good boy re-examine their structure and boundaries be necessary for greater women participation? Sharada, what do you think?
I definitely feel the idea is time has come that good boy syndrome it needs to be self-explored by people in any relationship, in any context, whether even as a team player. What is it that I'm losing out by being a good boy? Okay, therefore, what more can I be by being, coming out of that good boy, trap? I would put it that way. And therefore, my next question was, if I have to give this book, because I come across many men in my coaching, spouses of my women coaches who have this dimension of good boy, and the women not knowing how to challenge that because the expectations of a woman, as Ganesh said, that they're really transforming very fast, too fast probably, than the male partner. Okay, and the male partner in his traditional role is much slower. And my compassion goes for them that they also need a lot of programs and workshops, which I've been always telling that need to be supported. Just like women have a lot of support in the social structure to come out, break out of their traditional roles and, discover who they are. So in that context, if I have to give this book, Kartikeyan, to somebody, as an opportunity to explore oneself, which chapter, because not everybody is a reader now, so which chapter can I suggest? They can connect emotionally and therefore their curiosity gets, lifted to read the full book.
All right. So just before responding to that question, I will just add one bit which I want to say is that the good boy is not a trap, Sharada. Since you use the word, the good boy phenomenon or syndrome is not necessarily a trap. It can be trapping, and indeed I think a whole lot of men, and not just men, but women also who subscribe to that syndrome and observe it, or families and organizations, are quite deeply trapped by it. But intrinsically it is not, because if we say it is a trap, then there is no hope for the good boy. And therefore I just want to hasten to add, because I think where I have ended the book is that we need to look at hope for the good boy. We cannot, say that he is a vestigial or redundant and irrelevant kind of thing, because there are so many good boys. And so I just wanted to say that it can be a trap, but I think it's up to us. It's up to people like you who are all here to question this and then say, okay, can I unleash the positives of the good boy, which are immense and which can be refashioned for the times to come. Now, having said that, to go back to your question, I wish it was an easy one to say, just pick up, chapter 3 and read it and you will, I really think it really goes back to how you understand that person. So, for example, many of the chapters I feel they appeal to different types of people. For example, somebody may really want to know their shadow side, for whom they're, especially if you see that the person is struggling with expression of aggression, expression of their sexuality, expression of anger. So they become passive aggressive, etc. Or their curiosity has become dulled over repeated admonition, etc. They may find some release by reading the chapter on the shadow. Maybe they can get started there. They could equally read the one which is on the angst and sorrow of the good boy. A good boy has a sorrow. He carries a sorrow with him. What is that? Absolutely. In fact, one of the quotes I've talked about in the book is that for the good boy, his belonging is taken care of. Please pay attention to this. His belonging is taken care of, but his longing is not. He's actually, his family will take care of his belonging. Yeah, you come, you have a place here with us, etc., etc. But his desire, his need, his wishes, not all of them. So very often the context doesn't pay attention to it. So belonging traded off for longing. So I can let my longing go as long as I'm getting the patronage of the family. So a lot of good boys are like that. So what's that? Madi with Madhu, yes. Thank you. Yes. Very, very powerful one. Very, very interesting one. Having also said that, I think there are some people for who may be a little more cognitively interested in saying, okay, I understand. We have this question, right? Very often in leadership circles, we ask these questions, what, so what, and now what, right? So for people who are on the cognitive and conceptual frame, it will be very helpful for them to perhaps read about chapter 6, which talks about the adult developmental model, and then see where they can go with it. For people who are more sociologically, who say, I'm writing about all this good boy, but how does it fit in the society? They may like to talk about the patriarchy part. So there are different entry points for the book, but I won't say that there is one which will appeal to everybody. So then it goes back to you as the one who's kind of offering that they read something to say, hey, I know you, I see you struggling with this, please start with this chapter. Or maybe at least read this one chapter.
Lax, I have a question for you. In many organizations, the early days, we ask for a lot of compliance and conformance to processes because that contributes to scale, excellence, discipline, things working very smoothly. Would you agree with that? Yeah. And then we suddenly want them to be innovative, break the mold, think out of the box, uh, deal with disruption. Do you see any connection between this and the football? Yeah, in fact, that is something that I was thinking as you were speaking. When we are typecasting a good boy as someone who conforms to the processes, who conforms to the rules, the leaders like him because he obeys orders, everything else. In organizations today, you have a fair majority of a bunch of guys who don't follow these processes. You know, there's a vast set of guys who don't follow processes, who do things as they do, and they perform. So the question is, you are used to, as Ganesh said, you come from organizations which follow processes, Six Sigma, all of those things, and then you are thrown to a bunch of cowboys who produce results, but look, they do things their own way. So now, from a leadership perspective, you are left with a bunch of good boys that you need to manage, but you are also left with a bunch of boys who don't conform to any of these things, but they produce results. I mean, take an organization where there is a large majority of a sales team. I mean, you definitely don't associate processes, compliance, all of those things with those team members, with no disrespect meant to them. But you need all of them to coexist. You can't say I need an organization of conformists and good boys, but I'm also going to be given a bunch of other guys that I need to manage. So there is a paradox there that we need to see in a family surroundings. It's not as stark because the numbers are not large, and you are not driven for results. When someone doesn't conform to the family values, he is an outcast. So you don't expect him to perform or do anything for the family. But whereas in an organization, you need to carry everybody along and deliver. So there is a bit of paradox there, and that comes from what you started. So that's, and to me, this existed even before we knew what a good boy was. So it is not a good boy, fallout of what you've defined as a good boy. This existed in organizations where we had a set of routine ops team members, compliance, finance, processes, everything, and then there is a bunch of others that we needed to manage. So this is not a new problem, but the numbers are increasing on the other side. The number of conformists are actually slowly shifting away as we get into this new economy and startups, etc. The number of guys on the other side are actually increasing, leading to an imbalance of, how do you deal with this?
Actually, coincidentally, this afternoon I was thinking of pretty much on the similar lines. Is this audible? Is this better? So, to me, I think the shift is definitely there. That the organizations are demanding more of ungoodness. So, and they also sometimes have self-centric boys. Give him whatever he wants, he will hit the ball out of the park. He will do. He may be a jerk, he may be an irritating specimen, but he's getting something done. So let us suffer him. So people. And the good boys come and say, now what happened? I mean, why am I not getting the attention that somebody else is getting? So this is a very interesting thing that is existing today. My research suggests that there is a difference between organizational demands and expectations and the inner psychic reality of the person. So, for example, if I quoted all of this in the book, 80% of the Indian males, as per the database that I have with me of the transformative alignment map, 80% of the people reported being good boys of the Indian population, self-reported, 80%. I've used identities like custodian, provider of resources, guide, mentor. So if I look at it, it's 80%. Either as my primary pool or my secondary pool, we are good boys. If I cut the data to say, let me pick up only Indian males who are less than 10 years of experience, which means bringing it into the today's generation in some sense, the number hasn't fallen drastically. Maybe it has come from 80% between the two to about 70%. Yes, there is a shift, but it's not a dramatic one, like it's not 30%. So the gap is that internally the psychic landscape of the person is still coded with goodness, but he is coming to an organization role where he is expected to be ungood or self-centric, and it's creating a certain dissonance, which Ravi Kairan, one of the persons, he's a CHR of Bajaj Auto, he captures it beautifully. He says that 30 years ago, the biggest difficulty for corporate leaders was guilt. Have I done this? Have I gone over budget? Have I done something? You have heard this term, I'm sure. Asking forgiveness is better than asking for permission. So something like I will do something, but I have to go and ask for forgiveness. Today, if you look at the greatest mental syndrome that bothers people is not guilt. It's moved to anxiety. It's a big it's almost like a pandemic there, right? So anxiety is one of the biggest things. So people are living with this double bind. I mean, I'm expected to be, I have my coding of being a good boy. My role is expecting me to be something else. And how do I manage this? But I wanted to say one, and I think we'll go into probably questions, right? So real quick one, I want to say that we have to repurpose the good boy, and it's important for people like people who are all leaders, managers, captains of industry who now are future. Goodness is not something that is, it's good boy is not a life sentence, you know, he's got is in jail forever kind of thing. We have to be able to understand. So the way of treating this, can we help the good boy from being people pleasing to be more purpose driven? Purpose driven is also good boy. So he has to see that his need to commit can move from societal norms to more of intentional values, purpose-driven values. He can be guided to go there. Can you as leaders help the good boy to avoid the martyr trap? No, I become the martyr, I sacrifice myself for, can we have conversations with him that help him to see himself as a valued contributor, not a martyr whose manam, honor is at stake. You have these ungood boys and self-centric boys being dominant guys, right? Like Elon Musk, very in your face, charismatic dominance. In place of that, can the good boy become the subtle influencer, which he can. He can influence him very well. Like you have, for every Elon Musk, you have a Satya Nadella, who's been an archetypal good boy in many ways, and he's equally successful. And also, can the good boy practice a form of rebellion which is not often talked about? He can practice self-sustaining rebellion for the system. For example, the good boy can be the one who will ask managers and leaders saying, at what cost are you doing this? The cost question is often not asked. I'm not talking about financial cost, I'm talking about a psychological cost. So, I think there's a case for more Patagonias to come into the world. There's a possibility of more of those happening. But I think for that we have to understand the good boy not as a trap, but as having the seeds of something immensely powerful. That if only we are able to understand that, have empathy for that, and unleash it's leashed today. It's fettered today. It's caught in a conceptual mind. We treat it like the appendix. The appendix is a vestigial organ. Even in the book you have something called appendix, which is there right in the book. If you want to read it, you read the appendix or not. Bring the good boy to the center stage, reposition him. You'll find that he's probably able to run head to head with the ungood fellow.
Great, question.
All right, so going back to the discussion on the relevance of peculiar, I pondered the question, how much does the peculiarity arise due to the Indian context? Would the global characteristics of peculiar be different? That's a very interesting question. Do you want to take a thought of that? I'm thinking that, let's go ahead, but my quick response to that is, I think the characteristics of peculiar may differ from context to context, but peculiar is peculiar. I mean, like what may be peculiar in the Indian context, for that same, by the same token, you would have perhaps a very peculiar thing in a global north context.
So, are there are the cultural influences that would determine the difference. The culture that is prevalent in which the environment in which the person is exposed to is what would constitute the difference. And therefore, culturally, I think there are a lot of similarities where a person is exposed to societal and family context, I'm saying, because sometimes the society is very different what a person is exposed to, especially the younger generation. So I think to that extent, they would not be very different, but probably the prevalence of it could be different,
Yeah.
is what I perceive.
That makes sense. I also want to quickly say that in India, perhaps the peculiar comes from the good boy syndrome. If I were to think of the United States or some developed global north nation, the peculiarity there may be the dominant male.
Sure.
So there's still a peculiarity there, but it is peculiar to their context, which is different than ours. Looking at another question here, which is, what was the personal,
Point.
the
I'd
turning?
like to write the book. Was there a moment when you recognized the good boy syndrome
yeah.
in yourself and others?
Yeah. Painfully, I think. I mean, it was not one morning I woke up and I discovered that, life has been that of the good boy. I think it's been an ongoing set of inquiries. I think I must say that, look, ever since the 90s, I've had I've been associated with, and to continue now, I've been associated with two very critical institutions. One is called Sumedas, the other is called the Group Relations India. So these are the institutions which are essentially behavioral sciences anchored, which offer spaces to question oneself. So it was through processes like this that, the question of what are you doing with yourself, who are you, and what are you up to, are questions that have constantly, the word is not besieged, but they have constantly come at me. And then I've had a part of the turning point. So it was not a dramatic turning point. It was a turning arc or something that happened over
So
time.
I want to ask a question,
Sure.
difficult question. When you associate a voice with the good boy, is it the voice of a mother or a voice of a spouse?
You take the fifth of this question. It's a tricky question.
It's a good one.
It's the voice of the mother, of the spouse, at which point of life?
Yeah. No, I think if I speak from personal experience, it's really been the mother. The early stages of formation have been very much the mother.
Mother, to say good boy.
To say good boy. Or if you did something, you went out of line, you would not be called a bad boy, but like I've talked about in the book, affirmation comes for the good boy. It does not mean the not good boy is punished necessarily, but affirmation comes for the good boy.
How do you recommend parents or educators begin shifting the early narrative that contributes to the syndrome in young boys? Last question.
It's a good one, Ramesh from Tinagar. Great question. I think I'd like to say the question that everybody says it today. They say that, look, it has to begin in school, it has to begin at home, curriculum has to change, families need to. So sometimes I find myself getting a little cynical when I answer this way. Because I say, okay, this has been, it's common sense, right? What do we not know about this? However, I think that thing of saying curriculum has to change, parents have to change, is all, we can shout from the rooftops, but nothing really changes because that's kind of like something hard coded there. It has to go somewhere more than that. I don't know if any of you have watched this new series that's all the rage called Adolescence on Netflix. It's a very interesting one. I would recommend that you watch it because it talks about the relationship between a boy and his father and mother, and poses some very tough questions for you. It cannot be solved by curriculum change necessarily. It cannot be solved by just having, let's sit as a family and talk. Yeah, they may help, but they are necessary but not sufficient conditions. And I think, if I ask me, I don't have a ready answer, but I think it's an important one, educators and parents to sit and to really, really engage and ask their questions, to ask themselves this question. What will do this? And hope somebody takes this research up and does. It's a very important one for the nation.
Vinay,
MBA itself has a bad boy context, married but available. In the same vein, Kartik and I were in school.
Vinay's
college.
question, huh?
Yeah. He says that I was a bad boy in college, and which, if I was sitting there, I would perhaps say the same thing about Vinay. In fact, all of you will know, you must know one thing so that I can put this specious argument to rest. I made a wager with him. Vinay, will you please stand up there or just put your hand up? So I told him that, look, if I have a son, I will name him after you. I did. My second child, boy, his name was Vinay, and then I wrote to him saying that, look, I've kept my side of the, so it was a one-sided bargain. He never offered me anything. So who was the bad boy and who was the good boy? I leave it to this august audience to decide. But isn't being a good boy is situational? That's question is, isn't the good boy situational? Yes, contextual. Yes and no, Vinay. I think, yes, there are some parts of the good boy which are entirely contextual. In a particular context, I might just adapt. However, if I am making conscious decisions to be good in this context, I may actually be the ungood boy. I may say, here, let me wear the mask of the good boy so that I can do certain things in this context. So contextual good boy is very likely to be the ungood boy, but the good boy is otherwise a very prevalent, long-lasting syndrome.
Thank you. I have to be the good boy and conclude the discussion. Sir, good boy.
Yes. Good boy, good team, good panel. Big round of applause to the good team there. Good panel, on time. Gentlemen, I think we all become more wiser. Many girls sitting here, many women sitting here. You'll learn a lot of things about good boy and handle boys much better than what you have been doing, or it can be otherwise. Anyway, may I request you please step forward and do the honor to present a memento. Sundaram, you can also join us on stage. Very good. Neeraj, I'm sure he's a global former DRGO head. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, viewers. More than 440 people are watching it online. Number of questions have come. We'll let you go because I know you are also keen to watch the cricket match as much as the people who are sitting here. Anyway, good luck. Bye-bye till we meet.